I remember the first time I arrived at the campground. The sun had just sunk behind the horizon, leaving the forest bathed in a pale, trembling light. Mist curled through the trees, clinging to my jacket as if it had a mind of its own. The silence was profound, only broken by the occasional rustle of leaves, like whispered conversations too distant to understand. I set up my small tent, the zipper humming faintly as it brushed against the canvas. Somewhere nearby, a lantern flickered, casting shadows that stretched longer than they should, twitching at the edges of my vision. I thought I was alone, but the feeling of being watched wrapped around me like a damp blanket. Every step I took seemed to echo differently, as if the forest itself was breathing. And then a strange light appeared between the trees, a soft, wavering glow, unnatural and cold. My curiosity pulled me toward it, even as every instinct screamed to stay back. That's when I saw it. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Pale light sifted through the pines, soft and uneven. It brushed the fog at their bases, making it twist and curl around the roots. I felt it brush my ankles as I walked. The wind was absent, yet the branches moved. Slow sways, deliberate, as if the trees were listening. I stopped. The needles tickled my palms. A dry, static scent lingered in the air. I breathed in. The fog shivered. A hum began somewhere far, low and thin, vibrating under my ribs. I closed my eyes. It persisted, almost like it knew where I was standing. I moved forward, careful. The ground was soft with fallen pine needles, every step muted by the fog. Every crack of twig exaggerated in the stillness. Shadows pooled between the trees. I thought I saw one stretch, lengthen, a figure, tall and slender, just beyond a cluster of trunks. I blinked. It was gone. I stopped again, trying to catch the sound of my own heartbeat. But the hum, it filled my chest now. Slow, rhythmic, almost like a warning. I leaned against a tree, rough bark scratching my fingers. Cold mist settled on my neck, settling in the hair at the nape. I couldn't tell if the fog moved around me, or if I was moving through it. It whispered along the branches, soft, wet rustling, like quiet breath against my ears. The forest smelled damp, earthy, and faintly metallic. I shivered, not entirely from cold. A shadow flickered near the ground. I froze. It wasn't my own. It curved between two pines, bending strangely. Then, just like the figure, it vanished. I kept walking, though my legs felt slow. Each step pressed into needles that seemed to spring back. The fog thickened, coiling at my knees. I thought I heard soft footsteps behind me. No rhythm, no pattern. Just there, then gone. I turned a corner. The trees leaned toward each other, forming a pale corridor. Fog drifted like a slow river. The hum grew, just slightly, almost imperceptible. I felt it vibrating in my teeth, my bones, as though the forest was aware. Something moved again. A flicker at the edge of my vision. A figure this time, darker than the shadows around it. It paused, and I thought I could see the outline of a face, pale and unreadable. I blinked. Nothing. Silence returned, but the hum lingered. I pressed my palms to my ears, and it was still there. The fog swirled, slow and purposeful, slipping between the trunks like it had a mind of its own. I walked, barely noticing the cold creeping into my fingers. Branches scratched my sleeves. A faint rustle from above. Or maybe it was the fog shifting again. It was impossible to tell. I stopped in a small clearing. The trees arched like a roof. Moonlight was pale, spilling softly across the ground. Everything seemed normal for a heartbeat. Then a shadow passed across the clearing. Slow, deliberate. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see it. The hum softened, almost like the forest was inhaling. I felt my own breath caught in my throat. The fog pressed closer, touching my cheeks, damp and cold. I moved toward the edge of clearing. Every step felt heavier, like the mist was pulling at me. I glanced back. Nothing. The fog hung thick, the shadows deep. Only the hum remained. And then I realized I had been alone this entire time. But not really. The pines swayed, still without wind. The fog moved, deliberate, and something unseen watched from just beyond the veil. I didn't try to run. I didn't want to move too quickly. I just whisper my own name into the mist. It echoed faintly, swallowed immediately. Soft footsteps? Or just my imagination? Either way, I stayed. The forest waited. The fog lay thick along the creek. It clung to the reeds, curling around my ankles, wet and cold. Moonlight barely touched the surface of the water, pale and trembling. I saw it first from the corner of my eye. A lantern, floating above the mist. Its light pulsed, soft, steady, and somehow in time with my own heartbeat. I stepped closer. The ground was slick, damp with mud and fallen leaves. The hum of water, sliding over stones, whispered beneath me. The lantern drifted ahead, just out of reach. I followed, careful. Every step echoed softly in the fog, though nothing else stirred. The path bent and twisted. Impossible shapes, loops I didn't remember. I thought I knew this place, but it had changed. The lantern wavered again. Its light flickered, catching on wet bark, on moss, on the glint of spider silk. I could smell the damp earth, the sharp tang of pine resin, and something faintly metallic like rust. The trees seemed taller here, closer. Their trunks were marked with strange lines, faintly glowing, pale scratches, curling into patterns I could not name. They pulsed in rhythm, like the lantern, like my chest. I slowed, the feeling of being watched press at my skin, eyes unseen, tracking every movement. I tried to listen. No wind, only the hum of water and the pulse of light. I reached out, fingers brushed a tree. Rough bark, damp with mist. The markings glimmered beneath my hand, warm, vibrating faintly. I pulled back. The lantern drifted farther. Around a bend, a small footpath between two trees. I followed. The mist thickened. It clung to my sleeves, my hair, my cheeks. The path curved, then curved again. And again, I felt dizzy, like walking in circles. Each time I glanced behind, the lantern hovered there, patient, pulsing in the fog. Shadows bent unnaturally. Branches swayed, though the air was still. Rustling whispered above me, faint and teasing. I stopped. The lantern stopped. We waited together. I leaned against a tree, rough bark digging into my shoulder. The markings glowed brighter. I traced one with my fingertip. It burned just slightly, then dimmed. I noticed the hum, subtle at first. Now it threaded through the mist, through the trees, through my own pulse. It was patient, persistent, familiar and wrong at the same time. I stepped forward again. The lantern moved. My heartbeat matched its glow. Step by step, I felt the forest lean closer, watching, waiting. A shadow flickered in the fog. Not behind me, beside me. Quick, gone. I whispered my own name. The fog swallowed it immediately. The lantern pulsed once, slowly. I felt a nudge of fear and something else, curiosity. The path bent one last time. The creek appeared again. Water sliding over stones, gentle, endless. The lantern hovered over the edge, reflected in the moving water. Pale light breaking the surface. It pulsed slow, patient. I realized I had been following it for longer than I knew. Time seemed thinner here, or stretched. I couldn't tell. I crouched by the creek. Mist wrapped my hands, cold and wet. The lantern pulsed one final time. Soft, steady. Then it floated higher and vanished into fog, as though it had never been there. I stayed, alone. The hum of the forest returned. The glowing markings dimmed. The shadows settled. And still, the feeling of being watched remained. Soft, patient, waiting, just beyond the veil of fog. The air was cold, sharp, the kind that bites at the tips of your ears. I pushed through a final wall of brittle pine branches, and there it was, the campsite, abandoned. It sat in a small clearing, bathed in the weak gray light of a fading afternoon. 3 tents stood in a loose half-circle. Their fabric was still taut. No sagging, no collapsed poles. They looked lived in, as if their owners had just stepped out for a moment. My boots crunched on the frozen pine needles. The only sound in that immense quiet. I walked toward the center of the clearing. A ring of soot-stained stones marked the fire pit. A few logs were stacked neatly inside. I knelt down, pulling a glove off with my teeth. I held my palm over the blackened ash. A faint warmth rose to meet my skin. My breath caught. It was still warm. Someone was here. Recently. I stood up, my eyes scanning the ground, searching for the story. A boot print, a scuff mark, anything, but the ground was a uniform carpet of brown needles. Undisturbed, it was as if the people here had simply evaporated. A soft rustle came from the tree line. My head snapped up. I stared into the wall of dark green. Nothing moved. The sound was gentle, methodical, like someone slowly dragging a hand through a pile of leaves. It stopped. I held my breath. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. A thick, smothering blanket. Then the scratching started. It came from the other side of the largest tent. A dry, grating sound. Something sharp, dragging through the dirt. A slow, deliberate scrape. Then a pause. Then another scrape. It was circling the tent. My feet felt rooted to the earth. A cold dread seeped up from the ground, through the soles of my boots, locking my joints. I could only watch the space between the tents, waiting for the source of the sound to come into view. The scratching stopped right at the tent's corner. I saw a shadow, long and thin. It stretched across the forest floor, warping over roots and rocks. It didn't look right. The shape was all wrong. Too many angles. It didn't move. The air grew colder. I could see my own breath pluming in front of my face, a frantic little cloud. The smell of cold earth and old pine sap filled my nose. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The shadow shifted, not the thing casting it, just the shadow itself. It slid a few inches to the left. Then it went still again. The rustling started once more. This time it was closer, just beyond the first row of trees directly in front of me. The branches trembled without a wind. A soft, shuffling step. Then another. Something was walking there, keeping to the deep shade. I could hear its breath now. A low, wet rasp, like air being pulled through damp wood. It matched the rhythm of my own terrified panting. The scratching began again. This time, it was on the tent fabric itself. A slow, tearing sound. The nylon quivered. I saw the material strain from the inside, bulging slightly, as if something was pressing against it from within. But the tents were empty. I was sure they were empty. The rasping breath from the trees grew louder, closer. The rustling footsteps were now at the very edge of the clearing. I could make out a shape there. A deeper darkness in the shade, tall and unnaturally still. The scratching on the tent stopped. The shadow on the ground vanished. In that moment, everything went silent. The rasping, the rustling, the scratching, it all just ceased. The only thing I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. The only thing I could feel was the fragile beat of my own heart. I stood there in the center of that silent campsite for what felt like an hour, maybe more. The pale light began to fade, the gray sky bleeding into a deep, starless purple. Finally, my body unlocked. A shudder ran through me from head to toe. I took a single, stumbling step backward. My eyes never left the tree line. Nothing emerged. Nothing made another sound. I turned and walked away. My steps were slow at first, then quicker. I didn't look back. I just walked, leaving the warm fire and the empty tent behind me, swallowed by the quiet of the woods. The woods after the campsite felt different, older. The path was just a memory, swallowed by thick roots and rotting leaves. I walked with my lantern held high. Its yellow light pushed back against the deep blue of twilight. It carved out a small, trembling world around me, just a few feet of visible ground. The rest was a wall of black trunks. That's when I noticed the shadows. They didn't behave right. A tree would fall behind me, but its long, dark shape would linger on the path ahead, stretching out like a stain. It would hold for a second too long. Then it would snap back to its proper place. My own shadow, it seemed to hesitate, dragging behind my heels as if it were stuck in tar. I stopped walking. My heart was a dull thud in my chest. I held the lantern perfectly still. The light steadied. And in that stillness, I saw it. A flicker of movement between two pines. A tall, thin darkness that slid from one trunk to the next. It wasn't an animal. The motion was all wrong. Too smooth, Too silent. It was just a glimpse. Gone the moment I blinked. I took a step forward. My boots sank into the soft earth without a sound. The entire forest had gone quiet. No wind, no rustle of night creatures. Just a thick, heavy silence. It was like walking through cotton. A low fog began to curl around the bases of the trees. It slithered over the roots. A pale, gray mist that drank the light from my lantern. The air grew damp and cold. It carried the smell of wet stone and decay. I saw another flicker, this time to my left. A shift in the pattern of the trees. A space where something had been, and now was not. I turned, raising the lantern. The light pierced the fog for a moment, and there, deep between the trees, 2 points of light flashed back. 2 tiny perfect circles, like chips of polished glass. They were eyes. They just hung there in the darkness, reflecting my fire. They didn't blink. They didn't move. I took a step toward them. My breath hitched. The fog swirled around my ankles, cold and clinging. The eyes vanished, not like an animal turning away. They just went out, as if a switch had been flipped. One moment they were there, watching. The next, there was only a deep, empty black. I stood frozen. The silence was absolute now. The fog muffled everything. It felt like the world had been wrapped in wool. I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. A low, static hum. I started walking again. Faster now. My shoulders tensed, waiting for a touch. A breath on my neck. I didn't see any more movement. No more eyes. But the shadows, they felt deeper. They felt full, as if they had weight. And substance. I glanced behind me. The path was gone, erased by the rolling fog. It was just me, and this small island of light, and the feeling of being studied by the dark itself. The fog grew thicker. It pressed in. My lantern light seemed dim, struggling against the oppressive gray. I could barely see the trees 5 feet away. I didn't stop walking, 1 foot in front of the other. My hand was tight and sore from clutching the lantern handle. I just focused on the next step, and the next, leaving the lingering shadows behind me. Swallowed by the silent, waiting fog. The air is cold here, sharp, the kind that bites at your ears and the tip of your nose. It's late autumn. The trees around the lake are skeletons. Bare branches claw at a gray, woolen sky. The lake itself is perfectly still, a sheet of dark glass. Not a single bird calls. The world is holding its breath. I came here to be alone, to think, but the silence is different now. It's a heavy, waiting kind of quiet. And then I hear it, a murmur, faint like a radio station fading in and out. It's just below the water, a soft, garbled whisper. I stand perfectly still. My own breath fogs in the air. I listen. The voice isn't one voice. It's many, all tangled together, a chorus of fragments. I hear a piece of my own thought from this morning. I should have stayed in bed. The words are watery, distorted, but they're mine. Another ripple of sound. It's so cold. My own voice layered over itself, repeating. The whispers aren't coming from the woods. They're rising up from the lake, from the deep, dark water. My skin prickles. A chill that has nothing to do with the air crawls up my spine. I take a step closer to the water's edge. The pebbles crunch under my boots. The sound is too loud in this muffled world. The lake remains a flat, black mirror, reflecting the dead trees and the heavy sky. Then I see it, a single ripple, a perfect, expanding circle, right in the center of the lake. There is no wind. I didn't throw a stone. Nothing broke the surface. My heart is a dull, heavy drum in my chest. I watch the ripple spread. It glides all the way to the shore. It laps softly against the mud. Another whisper. Who's there? It's my own question, echoed back at me. The tone is all wrong. Curious and hungry. Another ripple forms. Then another. They start popping up all over the lake. Dozens of them. A silent, chaotic dance. The water is alive with motion, but the air is utterly still. The trees don't sway. The world is frozen. Only the lake is moving. I have to see. I have to know what's down there. My legs feel numb, like blocks of wood. I force them to carry me forward. One step, then another. I stop at the very edge. The water is so dark. It looks thick, like oil. The whispers are clearer now. A jumble of my own fears, my own memories, all played back to me. I lean over. My hands are shaking. I shove them deep into my coat pockets. I stare into the abyss. The water is a black void. For a moment, I see only the bruised color of the sky. Then my own reflection begins to form. Pale face, wide eyes, a look of pure dread. But it's wrong. The reflection isn't looking back at me from the surface. It's deeper, just a foot or so below the water. And it isn't moving with me. I tilt my head. The thing in the water doesn't. I blink. Its eyes remain wide open, unblinking. It's me. Every detail is perfect. The same coat, the same messy hair, the same scar on my chin. But the expression is empty. A hollow mask. A doll wearing my face. Our eyes lock. Its gaze is a physical weight. A cold pressure against my skin. The whispers stop. The ripples vanish. The lake becomes glass once more. The silence is absolute, deafening. The thing in the water, it slowly smiles. A stretch of lips that doesn't reach its dead eyes. A smile I never made. I can't move. I can't breathe. I am trapped in its gaze. A single, soft voice bubbles up from the deep. It's my voice, clear as day. Join us. The reflection lifts its hand. It presses its palm against the underside of the water's surface. The water holds it there like a skin. I feel a pull, a deep, terrible yearning in my chest, a need to step forward, to break that final barrier. I take a half step back. My boot sinks into the soft mud. The reflection smile vanishes. Its face goes slack, blank, and then it begins to rise, slowly, drifting up through the black water, coming closer to the surface, coming for me. I turn. My legs are weak, buckling. I don't look back. I run. The skeletal trees whip past me. The cold air burns my lungs. I don't stop until I'm back on the gravel road. My car is there, a relic from the real world. I risk one glance back. The lake is just a sheet of gray in the distance. Still, silent, but for a moment, I swear I saw it. A pale, familiar face, just breaking the surface, watching me go, and the soft, fragmented echo of my own frantic breath, chasing me all the way home. The forest was deep here, and quiet at a kind of quiet that feels heavy, that presses in on your ears. It was late autumn. The air was cold. IT smelled of wet earth and rotting leaves. I pushed through a final wall of brittle ferns, and there it was, the cabin. It was small, squat. The wood was dark with age, the logs soft and spongy under my fingers. Yet the structure stood perfectly straight, no sag in the roof, no broken windows. IT was wrong. The thing so rotted should have fallen down years ago. The door was already ajar, a sliver of deep shadow, waiting there. I didn't touch it. I stood maybe 3 feet away. That MY breath was a small, pale cloud in the still air. The forest behind me was holding its breath. Then the door creaked. A long, low groan of tirewood. IT swung inward, slowly on its OW, an invitation into the dark. I stepped inside. The air was different in here, the colder. IT smelled of dust and dry rot. And something else, something faintly sweet, like old flowers pressed in a book. Pale light filtered to the gaps in the walls. IT fell in thin, dusty shafts, illuminating floating motes of dust. The floor was a mess of dried leaves and dirt. I in the center of the single room. A single wooden chair lay on its side. I took another step. The floorboard under my foot gave a soft sigh. That's when I saw it. From the corner of my eye dot on the floor, near the far wall, an object, a small, dark lump, maybe a stone, maybe a knot of wood. It moved. It didn't roll. IT jerked a quick, skittering shift across the grimy floorboards. Too fast to really see the MY eyes snap the spot. Nothing, just a bare patch of dust. I stared, trying to make my eyes believe it was a trick of the light, that a shadow from a shifting tree outside. Then it happened again, closer this time to a flicker of motion right by my boot. I flinched back. The MY heart was a frantic bird in my chest. There was nothing there, just the empty floor. I held my breath. The only sound was a low thrum of blood in my ears. The cabin was silent. Too silent. The gentle rustle of the forest outside was gone as if someone had closed the door. A chill touched the back of my neck, a cold spot in the still air. And I knew with a certainty that turned my bones to ice. I was not alone in the room. There was a presence. Lingering behind me, just over my shoulder, I could feel it without turning to the density in the air, a weight of being. I stood perfectly still, that MY muscles were locked. I stared straight ahead at the wall. ATA long, thin crack in the wood. I could feel it watching me. Not with eyes, but with a kind of attention, a silent, patient focus. I didn't want to turn, I didn't want to see, but my body began to move anyway, a slow, agonizing pivot on my heel. The room was empty. The pale light still fell in its dusty columns. The chair was still on its side. The door was still open, but the feeling didn't leave. IT remained. Hovering in the space where I had felt it, a permanent chill in the air of the old cabin, a silence that was now a little deeper, a little more aware. I took a step back. Then another, MY eyes never leaving that empty space. I turned and walked out, back into the forest. The trees seemed closer now, the path less clear. I didn't look back, but I knew the door to the old cabin was still open, waiting, and the thing inside was no longer alone. The woods at night are a different kind of quiet. Not an empty quiet, a waiting one. I'd been walking for what felt like hours. MY boots sunk into the soft, damp earth. The air was cold. IT carried the smell of wet pine and rotting leaves, and a single beam of light cut through the darkness. Ahead of me, MY flashlight, MY only company. That's when I heard it. Not from the path, but from above. A soft rustling started in the canopy. High up in the ancient oaks, AT first. I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. The night was perfectly, unnaturally still. The rustling didn't stop. IT was a dry, papery sound, like pages of a book being slowly turned. Leaves brushing against each other. Not random. There was a rhythm to it, the pattern. I stopped walking. That MY breath caught in my throat. I tilted my head back, pointed my flashlight up. The beam was weak. IT barely pierced the thick weave of branches and shadows. The rustling seemed to form TO shape itself. IT wasn't a word. Not quite. But it was almost one of a hissing, sibilant whisper that wasn't a voice. Skinian. The leaves seemed to brush together. MY heart hammered against my ribs. A cold sweat trickled down my spine. Then I saw a shift out of deeper darkness detaching itself from a thick limb. A shape that IT was long and thin. Impossibly so, IT swung from one branch to another to silent, fluid motion. There was no grunt of effort and no snap of a twig. Just a whisper of movement against the backdrop of the starless sky. It stopped, and I knew it was observing me. My flashlight flickered. The white beam stuttered. The world jumped in and out of existence. With each flicker, the shadows around me changed. They grew longer, stretching out from the trees like grasping arms. I end one moment of darkness. I felt a chill, a solid, cold presence right beside me. Then the light sputtered back on. Nothing there, just the empty path. I couldn't look away from the treetops, and my neck ached from the strain. The shape was still there, perched. I could feel its tension like a physical weight, the pressure against my skin. The rustling started again. This time it was closer, lower in the trees. The same dry, leaf-on-leaf friction. IT formed another almost word. Sister, a part of me wanted her to TO just turn and sprint back down the path. But my feet were rooted to the spot, frozen in the damp soil. MY lungs refused to draw full breath. The flashlight flickered once more. This time, it stayed off for a full 2 seconds, 0.2 heartbeats of pure, suffocating blackness. I end that silence. I heard a soft, scraping drag from directly above my head, like something rough being pulled across bark. The light returned, weaker now, yellow and sickly. The shape was gone from its previous perch. MY eyes darted from branch to branch, searching the shifting patterns of light and dark. Nothing. Then a single leaf drifted down. IT landed on my shoulder. I flinched. IT was brown and brittle. I reached up with a trembling hand to brush away. MY fingers touched something cold and damp on the fabric of my jacket. As sticky as a... IT smelled sour. like old milk and turned soil. I looked up one more time, and I saw it. Not in the distance, but in the tree directly over the path, maybe 20 feet ahead. It was hanging upside down. Its limbs were too long, its body a tangle of shadows and pale, bark-like skin. IT had no face, just a smooth, featureless expanse. But I knew it was looking right at me. The rustling wasn't the leaves anymore. IT was a sound inside my own head, a static hum, 1,000 dry whispers, all speaking at once. It didn't move toward me. IT just watched MY light beam trembled over its form. The shadows it cast writhed on the ground beneath it. I took a single, shaky step backward. The thing in the tree did nothing. IT simply observed a silent sentinel in the rustling dark. I took another step. Then another. MY eyes locked on that pale, still shape. That I didn't turn my back. I couldn't. I walked like that for a long time, retreating step by step. The figure never moved from its perch. IT just grew smaller in my vision, not a knot of wrongness in the tree, until the path curved, and the darkness swallowed it whole. The rustling in my head faded, leaving only the silence, the waiting quiet. I finally turned, and I walked. The beam of my flashlight was dim now, just a pale, yellow circle on the ground, a small, fragile moon at my feet, leading me home. The fog was thick tonight, the solid wall of gray, swallowing the world beyond my front porch. The air was cold and damp. IT settled on my skin like a fine, wet dust. I had taken my usual walk. But the path behind me was gone, consumed by the silent, shifting white. And that's when I saw them, a line of faint impressions in the wet earth. Small footprints. They began in the middle of the path, as if someone had simply stepped out of the mist itself. My breath caught in my throat, that I was alone out here, that I knew I was. I followed them, my own boots sinking into the soft ground. The prints were delicate, a child's, perhaps. I counted 10 steps before they vanished. Just stopped. The moss was unbroken ahead, a chill, sharp and needling, traced my spine. That I turned, and there they were again. Behind me now, fresh, as if someone had just pressed them into the earth, leading back the way I came. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The forest was utterly still, and no wind and no rustle of life, just a heavy, waiting silence. I started walking again, faster this time, that MY eyes fixed on the ground. The footprints kept pace, appearing a few yards ahead, then disappearing into nothing, only to show up again to my left, leading off the path and into the dense, dark trees. A quiet laughter echoed. IT was soft, like wind chimes made of glass. IT seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the fog itself, from the pine needles above, from right beside my ear. I spun around, my chest tight. Hello? My voice was a dry crackle in the stillness. There was no one, only the endless, pale gray. The trees began to feel different. They were no longer just trees. They were watchers. Their gnarled branches seemed to twist slightly as I passed. I could feel a presence and a consciousness seeping from the bark and the soil. The forest was aware of me. IT was studying the frightened animal trapped within it. I started our UNMY breath coming in ragged, white puffs. The footprints flickered in and out of existence beside me, that ghostly guide I never asked for. And then I saw it, a light. Deep in the woods, a pale, sickly yellow. IT pulsed at a slow, rhythmic beat, like a dying heart. I stopped, my hands on my knees, gasping. The footprints were gone. The laughter had faded. There was only the light, and its slow, hypnotic throb. I moved toward it. Each step felt wrong. The ground seemed to soften, to suck at my feet. The path behind me wavered, the trees shifting like a mirage. The world was losing its shape. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, long, thin things that slithered between the trunks. They never stayed in focus. They were just a feeling of movement, a sense of being surrounded by things that were not right. The light grew brighter with every step. Its pulse was a physical pressure against my skin. The air grew colder. IT smelled of old soil and something metallic, like old coins. I was close now. I could see its source was just beyond a thicket of ferns. A soft, silent hum vibrated in my teeth. I pushed a branch aside. MY fingers were numb. And there, in a small, circular clearing, stood a figure, a silhouette, black against the pulsing, heart-like glow, IT was small. The size of a child, IT was perfectly still. And then it turned. There were no features, just a smooth, dark shape where a face should be. Its head tilted at a slow, curious motion, and then its form seemed to unravel. The silhouette contorted, twisting into an impossible, spindly shape, arms too long, legs bending the wrong way, its head jerked back. The smooth surface stretched into a wide, black oval. A scream ripped through the air, but there was no sound. IT was a wave of pure, silent terror. IT hit me like a physical force. It froze the air in my lungs. IT turned my blood to ice. I couldn't move, I couldn't blink, I was pinned there, watching the thing thrash in its silent agony, feeling its voiceless shriek inside my own skull. The pulsing light flared one last time, and then it went out. The darkness was absolute. The silence was complete. I was alone again, standing in the cold, dark woods. The only thing I could hear was a frantic, terrified beat of my own heart. The silence after the light vanished was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It pressed on my eardrums, a heavy, humming nothingness. My body was still frozen, locked in place by that final, silent scream. Slowly, feeling returned to my limbs, a painful prickling, like 1,000 needles, that I took a shuddering breath. The air was still cold. IT still carried that faint, metallic taste. I looked toward the clearing, where the thing had been. There was nothing there now, just deep, impenetrable shadow, the normal, dark shadow of trees at night. My legs felt like water, and I took a step back. Then another. The need to get away was a physical pull in my gut. I turned and stumbled to the dark, no path, no footprints to follow now. Just a blind, panicked rush away from that place. I don't know how long I ran. Branches whipped at my face and arms. Their touch was like cold, sharp fingers. The forest floor was a treacherous tangle of roots and fallen leaves. Every sound I made seemed deafening. The crunch of a twig, the rustle of my jacket. They were explosions in the quiet. I had stopped, and while my lungs were burning, I leaned against a thick pine tree, its bark rough and damp against my forehead. I tried to listen, to hear anything beyond a pounding of my own blood. That's when I saw the flicker, a soft, orange glow, deeper in the woods to my left. Not the sickly yellow pulse from before. This was different, a warmer. IT looked like firelight. A desperate, foolish hope sparked inside me. Another person at a camper, maybe at a ranger. Something normal. Something real. I pushed myself toward IT, that my exhaustion forgotten. The light flickered and danced, casting long, shifting shadows through the trees. IT with a heartbeat of its own, that a steady, comforting rhythm. As I got closer, I could make out a shape that a small wooden cabin. Its windows glowed with that soft, orange light. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. The smell of burning pine wood reached me. IT was the most wonderful smell I had ever known. I almost cried out in relief that I started to run again. My steps lighter now. I was almost there. The cabin door was just ahead. A sliver of golden light spilled from beneath it. I was 10 feet away when the flickering changed. It became frantic, uneven. The shadows on the trees stopped looking like trees. They twisted into long, thin shapes, arms and legs, bent at wrong angles, that I shook my head, blaming my tired, frightened eyes. I took another step 0.5 feet away. The light from the window stuttered. For a single, heart-stopping second, it went out. And in that moment of total darkness, I saw the cabin's true shape. It wasn't wood. The walls were made of twisted, blackened branches, packed tight like bones. The window wasn't glass. IT was a hollow, empty socket in a face of woven thorns. Then the light returned. The cozy cabin was back. The smell of smoke was now tinged with something else, something old and rotten. I stood frozen on the threshold, my hand halfway to the door. The door began to open inward. Slowly, silently, the orange light spilled out, illuminating the figure standing there. It was the same small silhouette from the clearing. Its smooth, featureless face reflected the firelight. IT stood perfectly still, 0.1 long, thin arm lifted at the single, pale finger uncurled, pointing not at me, but past me, back into the dark woods. Its head tilted, and from that blank, dark space where a mouth should be, a voice emerged. IT was a dry, papery rustle, the sound of dead leaves skittering across stone. It spoke a single word. Run. The cabin's light died for good. The smell of rot vanished. The world was just a cold, dark forest again. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran. I didn't look back. I ran until the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees. I ran until I found a road. I never saw the footprints again. I never heard the laughter. But sometimes, late at night, I can still smell pine smoke, and I remember the quiet rustle of a single, impossible word. The forest was always quiet this time of year. Late autumn. The air was crisp, and the last of the brown leaves clung to the branches like stubborn memories that I was walking a trail I hadn't walked in years. When I used to know by heart, that's when I saw the clearing that a small, perfect circle of bare earth, surrounded by a wall of dark pine. And in the center of it, the swing, an old wooden swing, hanging from a thick, low branch by two frayed ropes. IT was the only thing that didn't belong. There was no wind, not even a breeze to stir the pine needles. But the swing was moving to a slow, lazy arc back and forth, like a tired pendulum. IT was the only motion in the entire, still world. I stopped at the edge of the trees, MY breath caught in my chest. The air felt thick, suddenly, heavy to move through. Each time I exhaled, a small cloud of fog bloomed in front of my face. IT hung there, obscuring my vision for a second before fading. The world would come back into focus, and the swing would still be moving. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails gently drumming on wood. IT kept perfect time with the swing's gentle sway, back and forth, tap, tick. IT was a dry, hollow sound, the sound of something patient. I took a step into the clearing. The cold earth was soft under my boots, the heavy air pressing on my ears, making everything else seem muffled, distant. But the tapping was cleared. IT was the loudest thing here. Another step. The fog from my breath grew thicker. IT lingered longer now. A pale veil between me and the swing. I had to blink away. The ropes let out a soft creak that a tired wooden groan. The tapping continued. Tap, tap. I was halfway across the clearing. Close enough to see the grain of the old wood seat. Close enough to see the deep, dark grooves worn into it by years, or by something else, and my own fingers tingled. I could almost feel the splinters, the cold, rough texture. The swing was at the peak of its backward ARC that IT paused there for a moment, suspended. Then it began its forward journey. And it stopped, not slowly, not like it was winding down that IT just stopped, as if it had hit an invisible wall. The ropes went taut, then still, utterly, completely still. The tapping stopped with it. The silence that followed was a physical thing that IT filled the clearing, pushing against a heavy IT pressed against my eardrums, a high, thin hum in the emptiness that I stood there, frozen, and my own heartbeat was a frantic drum in my chest, the sound that felt too loud, too violent for this quiet. I was 10 feet away. The swing seat was motionless at a pale sliver of wood in the gloom. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. The fog from my next breath poured out, so thick and white it was like smoke. IT didn't fade. IT just hung there, a cloud in front of me. Slowly, so slowly, it began to thin, and as it cleared, I saw it on the swing seat, where Noah had been sitting just a moment before. There was an indentation, a shallow depression in the worn wood as if someone very light or not entirely solid was sitting there, waiting. The air grew colder. The heavy feeling in the air tightened, focusing on that one spot on the empty seat. I could feel a presence, a concentration of the silence of a patient watching stillness. I took a step back. The pine needles beneath my foot made no sound. I took another. The swing did not move. The indentation in the seat remained at a silent proof. I turned and walked away that I didn't UN, and my legs felt numb, my body moving on some old, forgotten instinct. I didn't look back. I didn't need it, that I could feel it. That quiet, focused attention on the back of my neck, a cold spot in the air that followed me to the edge of the trees. When I finally stepped back onto the path, the ordinary forest sounds returned, that a bird chirped somewhere. The wind rustled a few leaves. But that feeling stayed with me, the memory of a rhythmic tap, and the certain, chilling knowledge that the swing was no longer empty. The air was crisp. Frost clung to the edges of the fallen leaves. I thought I was alone. The campsite lay quiet, untouched, as if waiting. A fire burned, but there was no fuel, no logs, no kindling. Its flames licked the cold air, pale and uneven. I knelt closer. The smoke twisted upward, curling into shapes I couldn't name. And then, names drifted from it. Soft, barely their whispers. My own name, others I didn't recognize. They trembled through the fog, brushing against my ears. A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to turn, to see who else was there. But nothing stirred in the trees. Nothing except shadows. They moved differently around the fire. Not like shapes, but like water. Liquid black twisting over the dirt, bending where it shouldn't. I leaned back, but the earth seemed to pulse beneath me. A faint rustling came from beyond the clearing. I held my breath. The smoke thickened, smelling faintly of iron and wet stone. The whispers grew closer. Not louder, but nearer. Soft footsteps brushed the edge of my awareness. I closed my eyes. The firelight danced across my face. I could feel eyes on me, though I saw no one. One shadow stretched toward me, thin as a thread. It quivered and split, splitting again until the fire was surrounded by something alive. They did not speak. They did not move like humans. I felt my own heartbeat echo in the silence. The names continued. Whispers carried stories I did not know, a hum underneath the words. It wasn't music. It was intention. A cold wind slid across my neck. The fire wavered. Smoke trailed into the trees, curling around branches like fingers. I smelled damp earth and something sharper like metal, old and wet. I wanted to leave. My legs would not obey. The whispers asked questions. The shadows leaned closer, pale light catching nothing but the outline of their presence. I crouched, hands pressed to the dirt. It felt alive, trembling under my fingers. The fire flared briefly, too bright, then dimmed, as if breathing. I heard a laugh, soft, impossible, not joyful, not human. The air stilled. Whispers softened, shifting to a hum that pressed against my chest. I realized the campsite was not empty. It had never been. The fire pulsed one last time. Shadows reached up, reaching into the smoke, pulling something unseen. The names faded. Only my own remained, curling and sighing in the fog. I stepped back. The earth was cold beneath my palms. Breath misted in front of me. Soft footsteps vanished behind me. And then silence. The fire burned slower, dimmer. I could feel the presence around me. Still near, unseen but heavy. The night pressed close, waiting. I did not move. I did not speak. I just watched the flames, listening to the whispers fade into the dark, and the shadows remained. The fog lay thick over the path. Dew clung to the grass, cold against my fingers. I could barely see a few steps ahead. The trees hunched like old men in the mist. Their branches scraped together, whispering against the silence. I walked slowly, every footstep soft, careful. A light appeared, pale and steady, just beyond the reach of the fog. I squinted. It swayed slightly, but the figure holding it did not move. A person or something shaped like one. I called out. My voice felt swallowed by the damp air. The figure remained, motionless. I could see the lantern faintly, its light flickering in the mist. I stepped closer. The air smelled faintly of wet stone and old smoke. I noticed my own breath, thick and cold. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Something in the fog pressed closer, almost leaning into me. The lantern quivered. A flicker, then darkness. The light vanished. I blinked. Nothing. Only the fog. Only the whisper of leaves brushing against themselves. I looked down. Footprints. Pale, pressed into the soft earth. Leading away. Leading nowhere. I followed them, hesitant, toes curling into the wet soil. The fog seemed heavier here, almost breathing with me. Each footprint pressed deep, but ended in empty air. I bent closer, smelled the damp earth, felt the chill seep through my coat. I wanted to call again. I wanted to speak, to reach for the figure, but silence held me. It wasn't just quiet. It was thick, like something waiting to close in, a rustling from the trees, or maybe the fog itself shifting. I froze. Soft footsteps whispered behind me, but when I turned, nothing moved. The footprints remained, still leading nowhere. I pressed my hands to my knees, the dirt cold under my palms. The mist curled around me, smelling faintly of iron. I thought I saw a movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow, flickering in rhythm with nothing. I blinked. Gone. The past stretched, silent and hollow. No light, no figure. Only the footprints, whispering over the earth, echoing faintly in the fog. I stayed still, listening, waiting for the hum that never came. The cold seeped deeper into my bones. The fog clung to my hair, my sleeves, my skin. I felt watched, not by eyes I could see, by something patient. I knelt to touch one of the prints. The earth was soft, and it gave under my fingers. I lifted my hand. Nothing followed. No footprints extended beyond it. I took a step back. And another. The air smelled damp and sharp. Each breath hung in front of me, trembling. I didn't turn. I didn't speak. I just watched the fog settle back over the earth. The footprints faded. The lantern never returned. The figure never moved. I was alone, but the path remembered. The fog whispered, and the silence waited. The forest thinned as I walked. Fallen leaves pressed into the earth, damp beneath my shoes. A hollow open ahead, dark and narrow, smelling faintly of wet wood and decay. I stepped inside. The air shifted, heavier, as if the forest itself had been waiting. Every footstep multiplied. Soft taps, bouncing off invisible walls. My voice broke the silence. Hello. It came back before I finished. A low echo, shaped wrong, stretched and bent. Branches tapped against one another. Slowly, deliberately. It felt like they were drawing shapes in the air, tracing letters I couldn't read. I reached out. The cold wood trembled under my fingertips. The echoes didn't stop. Even my own breathing returned to me twisted, faster than I felt it. Each inhale mirrored. Each exhale anticipated. The hollow was alive with sound, but not all of it mine. I stepped deeper. A fog pressed against my ankles, moist and heavy. Every rustle, every snap of twig seemed to pulse toward me. Something in the air, it watched the rhythm of my movement. I tried to whisper a name. It repeated it, changing the letters, shaping something unfamiliar. A hum under the echoes, vibrating through the hollow. It was patient, almost waiting. I froze. A shadow moved above, branches bending against nothing or maybe something unseen. The tapping grew faster. Patterns like writing without words. I crouched listening. Each sound split into a dozen directions. The echoing voices seemed to answer each other, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. The hollow held them, shaping them, letting them leak slowly into the fog. I breathed slowly, trying to steady the tremor in my chest. The fog smelled damp and faintly metallic. I could taste it on my lips, sour and thick. My heartbeat pressed against my ears. But the echoes were louder. They moved ahead of me, behind me, around me. I stepped forward. My foot hit the earth, and the hollow answered before my heel touched. The echoes laughed quietly, soft but deliberate. I reached for a tree. The bark was slick with moisture, cold and smooth. The hollow shifted around it. The taps traced higher, then lower, circling, folding space inside itself. I whispered again, and again the voice answered before I spoke, twisting my words, stretching them into shapes I could not recognize. A pause, then silence. A leaf fell. It struck the ground with a thud that rattled my chest. No wind, no movement, only the sound, echoing and echoing, carrying something I couldn't see. I stepped back. The hollow seemed smaller, tighter, pressing in from every side. I smelled wet earth and something older, something waiting. I knelt, touched the soil. It pulsed under my fingers, faintly, like a heartbeat out of time. I withdrew my hand. The echo lingered, stretching into the fog. I breathed slowly, listened. The tapping softened. The whispers twisted themselves into quiet hums. I walked toward the edge of the hollow. The forest opened again. The fog thinned. The hollow held its secrets. The echoes faded. The branches still trembled, but slower now. I could feel the hush pressing against my skin, leaving it tingling. I stepped out. The cold air touched my face. The forest smelled clean, faintly of pine. The hollow behind me, it waited, and I could still hear it. The forest was quiet, heavier than usual. Dew clung to the moss, damp and cold beneath my fingers. Branches leaned over the path, brushing against one another with faint rustles. A tree stood ahead. Its bark was smooth, pale as washed stone. It glimmered in the low light, almost like glass. I stepped closer, and I saw them, not my own reflection. Faces stared back, pale, unblinking, pressed against the bark as if trapped beneath a thin skin. Some whispered with their eyes alone. I could feel their gaze, heavy, stretching across the air to my chest. I raised a hand. The reflection moved with me, but differently. A slow, deliberate twist of a smile. It was not my own. It was theirs. The air smelled damp, faintly of cold stone and earth. I felt the chill creep up my arms. The bark beneath my fingers was smooth and warm, almost alive. I leaned closer. The faces multiplied, layered, shifting in the pale light. One reached toward me, a hand pressed to the invisible glass. Its lips curled in a small, knowing smile. I wanted to step back, but curiosity pressed me forward. I felt the hum in the air, vibrating softly through the soles of my feet. The forest was silent, yet full of intent. I breathed slowly. My breath clouded the air in front of the tree. The faces did not waver. They simply watched, unblinking, unyielding. I touched the bark again. The reflection smiled wider. I felt my own skin crawl under its gaze. The smooth surface seemed to pulse beneath my fingers. Soft rustling from the branches above made me flinch. A faint smell of wet leaves and something metallic lingered in the fog. The faces pressed closer, leaning into my reflection. Like it belonged to them. I stepped back. The reflection's smile widened further. It was patient, quiet, knowing. The air pressed against me, tight and still. I felt the cold sink into my bones. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. The faces lingered, pale and unblinking. I could see shapes shifting faintly behind them. Shadows, soft and restless, moving under bark. Every detail sharper in the pale, muted light. I did not reach again. My hand hovered, trembling. The reflection waited, unmoving, smiling. The fog pressed closer. Rustling leaves whispered around the tree. The hum in the air softened, fading slowly. I turned away. The pale light lingered on the bark. The faces followed me in the corner of my vision, and the reflection waited, patient, smiling still. I walked away. Every step pressed softly against the damp forest floor. The cold lingered, brushing my sleeves. I did not look back. The tree remained, alone, its bark smooth and quiet, holding the eyes that never blinked. The fog lay heavy over the forest floor. Cold mist clung to my hair, wet against my skin. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves, thick and still. A sound drifted through it, soft, so faint it could have been the wind. But it wasn't. A lullaby, slow, drifting, sorrowful. It pressed against my chest with gentle insistence, pulling me forward. I stepped carefully, leaves rustling underfoot. The melody twisted around the trees, brushing against the bark. It smelled faintly of smoke and wetwood, distant fires burning somewhere unseen. The fog shifted as I followed it. Shadows stretched across the forest, bending as if listening too. Each step brought the song closer, carrying a weight I could not name. I reached the clearing. The pale light spilled over the ground, soft and misted. Shadows moved in rhythm with the lullaby, swaying slowly, as if remembering some forgotten dance. But there was no singer, no source of sound, only the shadows, tracing the invisible music in their silent way. I crouched, listening. The melody whispered through my bones. Sadness pressed against me, delicate but heavy, a hum beneath the tune, vibrating through the air, through the earth. I stepped closer. The fog wrapped around my ankles, cold and damp. Leaves rustled without wind. The shadows bent and twisted, swaying in time to the song. I reached out. Nothing met my hand, only the feeling of presence, brushing lightly against my sleeve. A fleeting chill that left my skin tingling. The song grew softer, folding in on itself. It was near and far, an echo of a voice I almost remembered, carrying hope and sorrow together. I stood very still. The shadows halted their rhythm, hovering in place. The fog swirled around them, pale and whispering. I felt the weight of eyes, unseen, watching. The lullaby began to fade. A final note lingered, trembling in the air like breath held too long. I could smell wet leaves and faint smoke and something older, something sad. The clearing emptied of movement. Shadows settled back into the fog. The forest exhaled softly, a quiet sigh I could feel in my chest. I stepped back, slow and careful. The last echo of the song pressed behind me, gentle but lingering. The fog closed over clearing, and the silence returned. I walked on, the cold pressing through my coat, the memory of the lullaby hanging in the air, soft, sorrowful, impossible to place. The shadows waited, quiet, and the fog followed, always close. The trail wound before me, curves that should have led onward bent back, impossibly, like the forest had curled in on itself. Familiar trees appeared again, yet twisted, limbs bending at wrong angles. The fog pressed close, damp and clinging. It smelled of wet moss and cold earth. I felt a pull beneath my feet, subtle but insistent, guiding me. Each step seemed predetermined. Leaves crunched softly, yet the sound felt delayed, echoing somewhere behind me. Branches brushed against my arms, though the wind had stilled. I looked back. The path I thought I knew vanished into fog. Shadows shifted along its edges, moving against their own logic. My heartbeat grew louder, hammering in my ears. Panic crept in, slow and quiet. I realized I was not just lost in the forest. I was lost in the path itself, in something beyond the trees. The fog thickened, brushing my cheeks with damp chill. Shapes in the mist seemed familiar, like faces pressed against my memory, but wrong. Every turn led me back to the same place, a looping maze without end. I paused. The earth beneath me trembled faintly, a hum vibrating through the soles of my feet. The forest watched, patient, silent. Every shadow leaned. Every branch whispered. I tried to call out. My voice came back before my lips had moved, distorted, stretched. It pressed against my ears and chest, mocking, reminding me of the path's grip. I moved forward, unsure if I had stepped before or after. The forest pulsed around me, twisting, folding. Leaves rustled without wind. The fog swallowed the trail behind me. And still, the twisting path waited. It curved, looping, endless, patient. I could not leave it. The fog pressed close, heavier than before. Every step I took was swallowed, muffled by the damp air. Then, glinting between the undergrowth, pale eyes. They were brief, like a flash of light. I blinked. Gone. Whispers drifted around me, soft, insistent, brushing my ears with names I could not place. Every step I took carried them closer. The fog seemed to pulse, pressing tighter against my chest. Branches scraped my arms. Cold, sharp, trembling. Shadows twisted between the trunks, retreating when I turned, advancing when I looked away. I tried to follow the eyes. They glimmered again, quick and fleeting, almost playful, then disappeared. The whispers thickened, murmurs, fragments of words I almost understood. The forest pressed in, alive with intent. I stopped, hands to my chest. Every breath seemed mirrored, echoing strangely in the fog. Something unseen followed me, always just behind the edge of vision. The eyes returned one last time, pale and silent, then gone. Only the whispers remained, pressing, patient, watching. I moved forward slowly, careful, heavy with dread. The fog followed, curling like water, suffocating, unrelenting. And I knew I was not alone. I stumbled on a tent. Fabric flapped lightly in the fog, though there was no wind. The entrance was open, dark and hollow, smelling of damp canvas and earth. Inside, a small journal rested. Its pages moved as if unseen fingers traced them. Letters formed, vanished, shifted. Warnings, names, nothing coherent. I leaned closer. Cold air brushed my cheeks. The faint rustle of the pages pressed against my ears, delicate but deliberate. Something stirred behind me. I turned. Only fog. It pressed closer, heavy and moist. The feeling of presence lingered. I could feel it brush my shoulders, unseen, patient. I stepped back. The journal trembled again. Words appeared, twisted and fleeting. I reached toward it, but my hand hovered, unable to touch certainty. The forest outside the tent was silent, yet it waited, holding its breath. The fog clung to my sleeves, my hair, my skin. I shivered. I withdrew, leaving the journal and the tent behind. The pages fluttered once more before settling, and the presence remained unseen but heavy in the mist. The air turned icy. Not snow, not frost, just a chill that pressed through my coat, seeped into my bones. I could see my breath. And another, faint, lingering in the fog. I was alone. A soft exhale brushed my ear. Cold, deliberate. I froze. The fog seemed to press closer, suffocating. Every tree leaned inward. Branches scraped softly, brushing against one another. The silence that followed was deafening. I moved slowly, careful, every step measured. The forest held its breath with me. I could feel it watching, patient, waiting. I shivered, hands pressed my arms, the icy air burning through my sleeves. Every rustle, every distant drip of water, sounded loud in the frozen quiet. I stopped. The other breath had vanished, leaving only the cold pressing against my skin. I exhaled, and my own mist hung briefly in the empty air. And I was reminded, even alone I was not. A low hum rose through the forest. It vibrated through my chest, faint but insistent. The fog pressed around me, heavy and damp, curling at my ankles. Shadows shifted between the trunks. They moved almost like they were alive, bending with the vibration of the sound. Each note pulsed inside me, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. I stepped forward. The hum thickened, pressing against my ears, my chest, my skull. Branches brushed against one another, tracing the invisible sound in the air. The forest seemed to breathe with it. Leaves trembled, and the fog swirled like water caught in a slow current. I could feel the vibration in my fingers and the soles of my feet. Then silence. The hum vanished abruptly, leaving my chest hollow. Every rustle, every sigh of the forest seemed louder in contrast. I stood still, breathing slowly. The fog lingered, heavy and expectant. Shadows bent back into the trees, still patient. The forest waited. I returned to my campsite. The tent fabric shifted, rustling softly in the fog. I peeked outside. Nothing. The grass lay flattened, a path leading into the mist. Soft footsteps pressed into the earth. Yet I could trace no one. The fog pressed closer, curling around my ankles, brushing my sleeves. Shadows lingered at the edge of the clearing, heavy, patient. I could feel them watching. The night air smelled of damp leaves and cold soil. Every rustle of the trees sounded deliberate, quiet, unnerving. I leaned closer to the tent. The grass was still pressed down where the path led, disappearing into the fog. I could sense movement, careful and patient, just beyond sight. All night, I remained near the tent. The rustling returned again and again, soft, deliberate, untraceable. Something had been here, and it had watched me. A pale figure appeared in the distance. I stopped, breath misting in the cold air. Every step I took made it vanish, then reappear closer. The forest grew heavy around me. Shadows stretched and shifted, bending like smoke. The fog pressed in, thick and damp, brushing my sleeves. The figure moved with the fog, drifting, patient. Its pale skin glimmered faintly, almost like moonlight on water. I reached toward it, but it faded again. Branches scraped softly against one another. Leaves rustled in rhythm with something I could not see. The forest was alive, pressing closer, beautiful and oppressive at once. I stepped slowly. The figure remained just beyond reach. Every step I took, every inhale, every heartbeat, it moved, vanished, returned. I exhaled, cold air curling in front of me. The fog held its breath with me, and I realized the forest itself was part of the figure, twisting, patient, watching. Whispered phrases drifted through the fog. Names I knew, places I had never been. The air pressed against my skin, damp and thick. The forest seemed alive, remembering me. Every step I took carried echoes of voices, soft, insistent, impossible to follow. Branches scraped together, rustling against one another. Shadows shifted between the trunks, bending as though leaning in to listen. The fog wrapped around my ankles, curling like water, heavy and patient. I breathed slowly. The whispers layered on themselves, faintly laughing, faintly warning. I could feel the forest pulling at me, drawing me forward and holding me back at once. Every sound stretched and warped, echoing off invisible walls. The ground smelled of wet earth and moss, the air metallic, thick with memory. I stopped, hands brushing the fog, listening, and I felt it. The forest knew me, and it waited. A lantern glowed at the edge of the clearing. Pale light stretched over the fog, soft and distant. I stepped closer. The lantern drifted away as I approached. Every step I took, it moved, patient, just beyond reach. The fog wrapped around my ankles, damp and heavy. Eyes pressed in from every direction. I could feel them watching, patient and still. Branches scraped softly above me, brushing together without wind. I reached, but the lantern floated farther, teasing, patient. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke. My breath hung in front of me, trembling in the cold. I stepped slowly. The fog swallowed the clearing, pressing closer to my skin. The lantern glimmered faintly, distant, untouchable. I was surrounded, yet utterly alone. I stood in the center of the forest. Shadows stretched endlessly, bending and swaying the fog. Soft whispers drifted around me, brushing my ears, impossible to follow. The fog swirled like water, curling around my ankles and legs. Every breath hung heavy in the cold air. I could feel the forest pressing in, patient, watching. A final light appeared far above the treetops, pale, distant, fading. I reached for it, fingertips brushing the mist. It slipped away, dissolving into the fog. Acceptance pressing quietly. Some things remained unseen. I exhaled slowly. The shadows leaned, whispering softly. The fog closed around me, gentle, patient. And I was alone,